بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الأخوة والأخوات الكرام، أسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير. يسر مركز إدارة المحلي بجامعة الأمير سلطان أن يرحب بكم في محاضرة اليوم بعنوان إدارة المحلية فيما بعد جائحة كورونا، والتي سوف يقدمها البروفيسور سبيرو بولالس، الأستاذ في التصميم والتكنولوجيا والإدارة بجامعة هارفارد. ويحاوره في هذه المحاضرة سعادة الدكتور محمد الكثيري. وسعادة الدكتور محمد الكثيري غني عن التعريف، إذ يعمل الدكتور الكثيري كعضو مجلس إدارة في العديد من الشركات الأهلية وعضو مجلس منطقة الرياض. أيضا الدكتور الكثيري سبق له العمل وكيلا لوزارة التجارة للتجارة الخارجية، وأمينا عاما لغرفة الرياض، وأمينا عاما لمنتدى الرياض الاقتصادي، وأستاذا مساعدا في الإدارة الاستراتيجية بجامعة الملك سعود. سعادة الدكتور محمد الكثيري يحمل شهادة الدكتوراه في إدارة الأعمال، تخصص إدارة استراتيجية من كلية إدارة الأعمال بجامعة مانشستر، ويرأس مركز الدكتور محمد الكثيري للاستشارات. وهذه المحاضرة هي محاضرة من ضمن محاضرات يقدمها المركز من ضمن أنشطته المختلفة. كما يسرنا في البداية أن نرحب بالدكتور محمد، وليتفضل مشكورا بإدارة هذه الجلسة.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. مساكم الله بالخير جميعا. شكرا للدكتور أمير باسم مركز الإدارة المحلية في جامعة الأمير سلطان. أرحب بكم جميعا في هذا اللقاء الهام جدا، وأشكركم على حضوركم ومشاركتكم. وأرحب بالدكتور سبيرو بولالس على مشاركته في هذا اللقاء هذا المساء. قبل أن أبدأ لابد أن نتوجه بالشكر لهذا المركز والقائمين عليه. شكر خاص لمجلس إدارة المركز ورئاسته ورئيسه الدكتور عبد العزيز، الدكتور سمو الأمير الدكتور عبد العزيز بن عياب مقرن، ومجلس الإدارة والجهاز التنفيذي في هذا المركز. وأيضا قبل أن أقدم الدكتور سبيرو، الحقيقة لابد وقفة مع هذا المركز لتقديم الشكر لفكرة هذا المركز. أنا أعتقد أنه أي فكرة تسهم في دعم وتطوير الجهاز الحكومي والقطاع العام بصفة عامة، أعتقد أنها مهمة وضرورية ويجب أن تقدر، لأنه أعتقد أنه مهما قيل ويقال وسيقال عن القطاع الخاص، إلا أن القطاع العام يظل هو المخطط والمشرع، وهو المحرك الحقيقي للتنمية، وهو الباعث للتنمية، والمقدم لجميع عناصر التنمية. والتفكير بأي منهج وأي أسلوب لإدارة القطاع العام وإدارة الجهاز الحكومية أعتقد أنه من المبادرات التي يجب أن تذكر وتشكر. فالشكر للقائمين على هذا المركز، والشكر لكم لحضوركم. يعني اسمحوا لي الآن to switch to English and to introduce Dr. Spiro Bolalis. Spiro Bolalis is a professor of design, technology and management of the Harvard Design School. Since 2008, he is the director of the ZOFNAS program for the sustainability of infrastructure that has led to that Envision rating system. He is also the principal investigator of the project called Gulf Sustainable Urbanism for 10 cities in the Gulf region. He has taught as visiting professor at many universities in Zurich, Switzerland, Holland, Germany, Greece, and has offered joint courses with Harvard Business School in planning and development. He serves as well as the co-chair of the advisory committee in future cities for the Singapore. Dr. Spiro, I will, according to the program, you have 45 minutes to give us the presentation about the subject, which is the post-pandemic local governance, which is an important topic these days. After the 45 minutes, I will try to give some comment or question if I have. Then I will open the floor for the audience to give some questions. But before that, let me just say some words regarding how to get the question. First of all, there is interpretation. There is Arabic interpretation, as well as from English to Arabic and vice versa, I think. and also we can get the questions through the Zoom, as well as through the Twitter of the center. You can, write your question, and the center will receive it and pass it to me to, ask Dr. Polalis, for these questions. Now I will just welcome and Dr. Polalis and give him the floor for 45 minutes. I hope he will end his presentation with this time framework. Thank you for your audience. Thank you for Dr. Polalis, and now the floor is for Dr. Polalis.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arkathiri, and thank you very much to the King Solomon Center for Local Governance. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to communicating with you about what I believe that local governance should pay attention now, during the pandemic and after the pandemic. I also like it because I feel like I'm in the kingdom. It is the first time for the last many years that I have not been there for more than a year after the lockdowns started, after the pandemic started, and I'm looking forward to having flights again and the capability to visit your beautiful country. So let me start. Let's start with the first slide. And the topic today is local governance after the pandemic, and I would like to revisit the resilience and sustainability of cities. If we go to the next slide, let's start with the coronavirus crisis. As you all know, in the coronavirus, we were not ready. We were not ready because simply we had not planned, were not expecting something like this to happen at that scale. But at the same time, the coronavirus pandemic showed how limited is our resilience, the resilience of cities. And I believe that while we try to face the immediate problems, which more or less, I understand that in the kingdom you're doing pretty well, we need to rethink how we're going to plan, how we're going to design, how we're going to develop and manage the cities, knowing what happened now. But at the same time, and this is the very important point that I would like to stress, not come back to where we were before, but have a better understanding of the cities and improve versus where we were before. What do I mean by that? I mean that we have an opportunity to think, we have an opportunity to look back, we have the opportunity to have free time, more free time to plan and get ready. And in order to do that, we need to follow an integrated, holistic approach, working with all the stakeholders to enhance the urban center's long-term sustainability, which we define as social, economic, and environmental. Let's go to the next slide. We all know the problems of the pandemic. Here I have listed the more important on the left, and you can see that there are two categories. One has to do with public health and human life. The second part has to do with the economy and how the cities function. Because basically, we lost the coherence and the economic activities of cities with this pandemic. Many things have been interrupted. In a way, it is like we do not live in a city, but we live isolated, each one of us, like we're in a very big countryside, and we lost the economic and social cohesiveness that the city offers. If we go to the next slide, at the same time that I said that the pandemic has hit us so hard, we have to pay attention that the most damage of the pandemic, the most victims, are in densely populated urban centers where people are near one to the other. So the high risks are because of the population density, which is something that we want to have. This is something we have struggled to have for many years, and this is something we want to maintain regardless of the pandemic. At the same time, cities have more national and international connectivity. So the connectivity has spread the virus more, and also the public health response is in cities better, but at the same time much more complicated. Let me go now to a second category of urban settlements, which are the informal settlements. And the informal settlements are the ones that they pose even higher risk. Now, by informal settlements, I don't necessarily mean that people just go to different places and build their huts and what we see in other countries, but even in the kingdom, where people get extensions of houses with no permit, where the infrastructure is not appropriate because the housing is not in the right place, and so on. And the informal settlements are even more of a source of spreading of the virus. As we look at the slide that we look right now, we see that 68% of the world's population will live in cities. By actually, if you can go back, 2 slides back, the previous one, thank you. Now the next one. The one, here it is. So a very large part of the population will live in cities. So when we're talking about cities, basically, we're talking about, in a way, about the population of the Earth. And we see also that a very large percentage of the people on the Earth live in informal settlements, which is very important. First, to upgrade the cities and design resilient cities. This is the 68%. And also it's even more imperative to seriously upgrade the informal settlements and provide services, provide planning, provide what people expect to have in a city. If we go to the next slide, let's say what happens during the pandemic, what happens everywhere in the world. And if we look on the next slide, we see that the immediate response to the pandemic is first physical separation. Physical separation so people do not get close to each other. The next thing is to utilize open spaces as much as we can and the proximity to nature, which is easier to countries that they are lucky to have a warmer climate. It's more difficult for the colder climates of the north or the very south. And the next thing is to employ information technology. I will stop here for a minute because the deployment of information technology in the pandemic has been decisive, big, and has changed our lives. What we do today would not be even thinkable a year ago, where I would expect to travel to meet most of you in a big auditorium and interact in a different way. Information technology is here to stay, and it's going to change our lives for a long time. It is very important for local governments to pay more attention to information technology and change the way that people interact with the government using information technology. This is the highest priority. Those of you who are in important positions in the cities, please make sure that you try to automate your services, that you start with the doctrine that people should not visit public buildings in order to do whatever they need to do with the government. Everything has to be done remotely. The fourth bullet is about advancing the science of the pandemic. While other countries are spending time to develop the vaccines, There is room for everybody to advance the science of the pandemic by studying the statistics, by looking at public health, and also the most recent advancement, which is studying the concentration of the virus in the sewage to determine how much it has proliferated in a particular area. Transportation, especially public transportation, has been affected very much from the virus. And it has been affected so much that the people who need to use it, and they need to use it for their work, they're suffering because they have to be in enclosed spaces, the enclosed spaces of the buses. And at the same time, there are not as many buses. So this is an area that we have to pay attention as city officials. Make sure that you provide sufficient public transport and safe public transport. And finally, probably the most important of the six is the last one. You have to keep very active information channels. You have to be in a position to communicate as much as you can with the people. The people are stressed. The people need to know what is happening. So information is very important. And this is where it ties with information technology. Now, all these things are happening, but let's continue to the slide that we see right now and see how we can also initiate the management of change. And the management of change is going to be get ready for the day after the pandemic. First of all, very important, stop saying this is what we have done all the time. Rethink, think out of the box, rethink from scratch, all the way from the very beginning. What you have been doing until now, it's not relevant anymore. This is the biggest trap. We're going to make things as they were before. The next thing is you have to start collecting data. You have to start collecting data because with the data, you will make the right decisions. And you have to collect data not only during the pandemic, but utilize data that you have collected in the past to see what needs to be done. So the decisions are fully informed with the collected data. Then, since local governments has to do with planning and bylaws, rethink the planning regulations, rethink the bylaws, rethink how you can make a city that will require less transportation, that is going to have mixed use areas, that is going to have all the amenities near the place that people live. And also you have to rethink about the open green space. The open green space in dense parts of the cities, it's going to require certain demolitions. Be brave on that and demolish buildings to make them free space, to make them place that the neighbors can go and spend time on the outside. Then you have to enhance services. By enhancing services, we mean you have to provide the better infrastructure in terms of transportation, in terms of information technology, make sure the water is clean, what you used to do, but do it better. You have to also rethink about healthy housing. One thing we learned is that if we circulate the air through mechanical systems in the buildings, we circulate the virus. So think about healthy housing, healthy buildings, especially public buildings, and pay particular attention on how you can get fresh air inside the building. This is what public health officials tell us. This is what they tell us on how to prepare the buildings to be occupied again and be functioning again. This is what we need to do about workplace. And finally, we have spent a lot of money for the pandemic. we have to engage the private sector in order to make all these things happen. How you can engage the private sector? You have to reduce bureaucracy, but at the same time, you have to enable transparency. The private sector must be regulated, especially when they offer public goods. And we have very good examples that we can give you in terms of how you can regulate and privatize even amenities like water, energy, and so on. If we go to the next slide, is who will pay? And again, it's going to be the central government, it's going to be the local government and the cities, which means that you have to collect money from the residents, and this is a totally new area that we need to talk about, but also the private sector. And remember, the private sector is looking for profit, so it has to have incentives and guarantees, but at the same time, it has to have regulation. Let's go to the next slide. So let's focus now a little more specifically about the cities after the pandemic. And if we go to the next slide, we notice again how the urban population is going to increase on these two bars. And very soon, in a few decades, we're going to have most people living in the cities, and the cities, I use the term urban settlement. The cities lack resources, they have overloaded infrastructure, they are polluted, and they are subject these days to extreme weather phenomena as a result of human activities. So if we go to the next one, when we're talking about cities, we have to have something simple in mind that can be helpful. For example, the city has three components. This is the hardware of the city. It has the spatial planning, it has the infrastructure, and the buildings. And all these three interact with each other. You cannot have a resilient, you cannot have a sustainable city if you don't make the three elements work together. You start with the spatial planning. The spatial planning is going to allow you to position the infrastructure and at the same time to reduce the need of the infrastructure. And then you have to design the buildings, and the buildings are nothing more than clients to the infrastructure. So they have to be part of the infrastructure, and they have to give back, and they have to take from the infrastructure as well. And this is here, it's not linear, it's a circular viewing of these three elements. If we go to the next slide, cities today are very big. Take Riyadh, for example. Riyadh was designed, actually planned by planner Doxiadis, using the concept of cities within the cities. Right now, it's a huge city in terms of area. And the result is that it's very difficult to go from one place to another. Unfortunately, the cities within the city concept of Doxiadis, the sectors, has been lost. And has been lost because it was not implemented properly. Nevertheless, we have to start thinking how we can make large cities, not just one city, but cities within the cities. And the number that we should focus is cities within the cities, that every city is about 2 by 2 kilometers, and every city has about 30 to 50,000 people. And of course, the cities within the cities are going to interact with each other, but they have to be self-sufficient with mixed use and proximities. Let you rethink the planning of the cities, especially at the time that you start looking again on the planning of the cities. and go back to the basics of the acoustics theory and try to understand how you can expand your cities, that they need expansion because of population growth. They need expansion, and it has to follow a model that's going to be sustainable and resilient. If we go to the next slide, we talked about planning. Let's talk now about the infrastructure systems. I see 7 infrastructure systems being part of a city. And let me go one by one in the way on how much space they take. First is the landscape as an infrastructure. This is the natural systems, nature within the city. This is the green space. This is the public space. This is not necessarily built space, but it's extremely important for the city to function. The next one is transportation. Transportation is the one that needs a lot of attention. Needs a lot of attention because you have to start planning for alternative means of transportation. You have to start planning for pedestrians, for proximities, for minimizing trips and distances. And you're going to ask, how can I minimize distances? The answer is very simple. If someone works near his or her residence, if someone goes for entertainment near the residence, if they don't need a mechanical means of transportation, if they can walk, if they can take a bicycle, this is what we mean by minimizing the distance. We have to make the public areas friendly to pedestrians, wide sidewalks that are covered so they provide shade, especially in the harsh climate of some of the Saudi cities, including Riyadh, and also offer more paths and small roads to avoid congestion. Let's go to water. Water is extremely important to provide to all clean water, sewage treatment, and wastewater management. In Saudi Arabia, you're doing relatively well on this. Other parts of the world have more problems. Energy, you have to secure continuous energy supply for all energy during shocks. And by shock here, I mean during things that are happening and they're putting a shock on the city. And at the same time, you have to reduce the energy use and promote renewables. I know that you have plenty of fossil energy right now. I know at the same time that you're looking for renewables, and you're in a unique position with the sun that you have in very large areas in the desert that you can really use for renewable energy, which you do. Then you have to pay attention to solid waste. Solid waste needs management. Solid waste needs to be separated, reused, recycled, and very little should go to a landfill. And then we go to information. Information becomes probably the most critical of the infrastructure systems during the pandemic, and it's going to become even more important as we proceed. The city is not anymore brick and mortars. The city is bits and electrons, and we have to make sure we have a secure internet, provide constant communication, and provide and manage electronic services, especially electronic services for the citizens like e-government, e-learning, and so on. It's interesting that I had developed these slides before the pandemic, and now that I see some of these, how relevant they look. So those of you that you are governing your cities as part of the local government, make sure that you put as much as effort as you can to deploy information technology. Finally, food security is important for a city. It is important to have a circular economy. It's important to be able to grow food within the city to the extent that it is possible, and also to promote local food production, which is not difficult to happen, especially with vegetables and other things that they can grow within the city, and they can provide a fresh air. If we go to the next slide, we have to pay also attention that we follow a holistic approach to have a city for all. We have to engage all, especially the most vulnerable members of the community, and we have to integrate informal settlements through planning. And here you see that planning, integrated planning, is going to lead and is going to be fueled by financial development and social development. If we go to the next slide, this is where the UN 2030 agenda comes in with the Sustainable Development Cities. What I was presenting you until now, they exist before the time of the SDGs, but now with the SDGs become much more relevant. And again, look at number 11, sustainable cities and communities. So keep that in mind, deploy it and use it in the local governance. This is an advice I give you, because if you put it as part of your local governance, it's going to make a difference, and eventually it's going to pay back by acceptance from the people, but also you're going to be able to get and use funding much easier. If we go to the next slide, this is a photograph that I took in Geneva myself at the United Nations. It was on the 30th of September of 2019, a year and a half ago, where young students were visiting the UN, and here they wrote on this big white board, and you see some hands still writing, that simply were saying, the children, we want action on these things. So young people cannot wait. They are looking at all of us to apply all these things. Which actually comes to the next slide, which is the definition of sustainability. We need definitions, because otherwise it leads to misunderstandings, but at the same time, it leads to different ways of moving as we're moving to achieve certain goals. So on the definition of sustainability, I would invite you to use the one in the red, although most of you are familiar with the classic definition. But let me go to the update of the definition, which again, the updated definition comes from the United Nations, WWF, and simply says that sustainability means that we improve the quality of human life while living within the carrying capacity of supporting ecosystems. Pay attention to this. Does not say we need to protect the environment. Does not say anything else that some people understand as sustainability. The objective is to improve the quality of human life. However, living within the carrying capacity of supporting ecosystems, which simply means protect the ecosystem, which simply means protect the environment. This is a wonderful definition, and I strongly suggest that you use it. And as we get out of the pandemic, put it as your flag on how you're going to proceed. Let's go to the next slide and understand what we mean by that. On this graphic, and I'm pretty sure you have seen many graphics like this, simply shows that after about 1970, people consume more of the environment than what we have. And it's interesting that on the left, we plot the planets. We have only one, only the green one, and we already exceed it, which means that we don't have enough resources anymore, no matter what we do. So it's the obligation and responsibility of all of us to start using less resources, to start using less of the natural capital so that we can all live happily. And this applies primarily to countries, rich countries, and I consider, of course, Saudi Arabia to be a rich country, and you have to think like this as well, like everybody else. Which actually, if we go to the next slide, and since I mentioned about working definitions, and since we already defined sustainability, let's also define resilience. And resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from shocks and stresses. Notice that if something is resilient, it's not sustainable. You can put as much concrete as you want to withstand an earthquake. You can put as much concrete as you want in order to elevate whatever you're doing and avoid the flooding plains. However, this is not going to be sustainable. So everything resilient is not sustainable. On the other hand, everything sustainable is resilient. And this is the important thing for us to remember. So sustainability is a stronger concept than just resilience. The next thing is about climate change. And climate change is even a more narrow definition of sustainability and resilience. And it has to do on how to protect the planet from the climate change, and at the same time, how to adapt our project to climate change. Let's go to the next slide. Again, definitions. The climate change mitigation simply means that we need to keep the temperature of the planet below 2 degrees Celsius, and already we have exceeded that. Below 2 degrees Celsius from the average temperature of the pre-industrial levels. This is something that requires a tremendous amount of work, and we have missed the train. The next is the adaptation, that we adapt what we're doing for the climate change. And at the level of the local governance, since we're talking about local governance today, our objective is primarily to adapt. So what you do can survive the climate change, but at the same time, make sure that you contribute to mitigating the climate change. So let's go to the next slide. This is a good picture that shows our current cities. Our current cities, what they do is they import food, materials, products, energy, and fresh water, and they produce greenhouse emissions, destroy the climate. They produce solid waste that's being sent somewhere else, sometimes very far away, and they produce wastewater that pollutes our rivers and the sea. Let's go to the next slide and see what we would like to actually have. And what we would like to have would be to have a sustainable city with a circular economy, so that we still import on the left, but at the same time, we minimize the byproducts. I don't say we eliminate them because it's not possible. And we recycle water, solid waste, and energy. And at the same time, we recycle and we make our own local and urban food production. So what happens here is that we have to start thinking about this, and this is one of the hottest topics these days at the United Nations. It is one of the very important topics in the different multi-development banks. Actually, I'm working right now with the Asian Development Bank, and we are focusing exactly on this slide, how we can make cities.
Dr. Wallace, like you have 10 minutes, please. If you consider that, please. Okay?
Yes, I know exactly.
I hope you will finish.
I have my watch
by
here.
10 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So let's go to the next slide. our cities today, and if you just look around you, you're going to see that you have car-dependent cities. You have cars, and the cars, you go to the places that you work. If we would put all the people in the world at the density of Los Angeles, they would take the entire Europe except for Spain and Portugal. So what you can see here is that density becomes extremely important. And if we go to 2 more slides, go to the next one. We're going to start skipping some slides. Let me show you a conflict. And I say, I want you to see this conflict because this is something that we all have to think about, all these ideas, because they're very good ideas. The question is how we're going to apply. Let's look at this conflict. Human activities improve the quality of life, but human activities affect the environment. And as the environment is affected, it downgrades the quality of life. So the question is, how can we improve the quality of life without damaging the environment? And this is the objective of what we're discussing today. This is doable, but keep this slide in mind. And if someone tells you, but give me an example, I will go to the next slide. And in the next slide, I show the example with the air conditioning. Air conditioning is extremely important for climates like yours. I have to admit that when I'm in Riyadh in the summer, it's indispensable to use air conditioning and improves my thermal comfort. At the same time, if I don't use renewable energy for electricity, then the greenhouse effect is going to downgrade the environment, and then it's going to downgrade the thermal environment. So where is the answer here? The answer is avoid the greenhouse effect. Is that possible? The answer, yes, it is. However, it's not as simple because even the way we produce, we put renewable energies to work, then we spend and we create greenhouse effects. So if we go to the next slide, as we proceed with sustainability, I will use here the basic concept that we are using at Harvard as we develop knowledge along these lines. And I welcome you all to look at our research and use it as appropriate, and basically say that we want to keep a balance between the human life and the carrying capacity of the environment. We have to plan for the long term, and we see that we have 5 different areas that we need to pay attention. And these 5 different areas are the quality of life, how we use materials, energy, and water. This is the allocation of resources. How we protect the natural world, how we take care of the climate and the risk coming from the changing of the climate, and also how committed we are to make all these wonderful things happen in our cities. Notice that every human activity in the built environment in the city, they relate to these 5 areas. And if we go to the next slide, in order to study all these things, I started back in 2008 at Harvard to develop a system that studies all these things in detail that unfortunately we do not have time to see today, but I would be glad to give you any information you would like to have. I do this with the industry. We have very important industry members. I do that with several parts of Harvard, as you can see, and this is the Zofnas program, and the Zofnas program develops know-how, tools, and methodologies, and combines academia with industry. If we go to the next slide, this is where the Zofnas program identifies the 7 infrastructure systems that we mentioned earlier, and the different 5 categories, and links all these and gives you very specific information on how to make sustainable and resilient cities. So let's go to the next slide and say that the Zofnas program considers the city as a system, like we discussed before. And the system now, it's not only the buildings and the infrastructure entities, but what I add here is governance and society. And then the natural systems that all these things are part of it. And this is what we are studying, and all this technology and know-how is available at our own website. We have developed rating systems, we have developed publications, and I believe that it's going to be a unique opportunity for the cities of today that they are suffering because of the pandemic to look at all these things and implement them, and have in mind that another pandemic may come, but even if it does not come, you have to give better quality of life to the citizens. So, Dr. Al-Katriki, I'm going to stop here. It's 3 minutes earlier. You can project the last slide. Actually, I'm going to skip very many other slides, but I believe the main content was provided today. No, actually, it is this one here. Very good. So you can see me, you can see my email address if you want to reach me, and also the Zofnas program at Harvard that I mentioned to you that is doing all this research. So I stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Dr.
I know for 3 quarters it was a long time, but we're ready to go into discussion.
By the way, you still have 2 minutes more. Okay.
We said
you should finish within 10 minutes, but you finished before. Thank you very much. You gave us 2 minutes more. Dr. Balalas, let me just, before actually, I have many questions here, but before I just read this question, let me ask you actually, first of all, thank you very much for this interesting and important presentation. But let's come to the difficult actually questions. If we think about implementation part, okay, you suggest something that is really interesting, is really encouraging, but if we consider the implementation part, taking into account the economic situation and the financial situation that countries suffer from, not because of COVID-19, but before that, for the last maybe 6-7 years, most actually starting 2008 at 28, most of the countries have financial difficulties, have economic problems, and what you suggested, they need spending, and as you said, you need to demolish houses, demolish roads, and it's like starting from scratch. How to put these things together? If especially, for example, you suggest the concept of cities within the city. Okay, this need lots of money, lots of work. Consider also the private sector is hesitant to engage in long-term projects. Okay, worldwide, nothing in the kingdom, but worldwide, usually the private sector is not willing to engage in long-term projects. I mean, if we talk the implementation part, how can we implement what you have said? Should we implement it as a whole, or is there any way to take part or leave part? What do you suggest about the implementation?
Yes. First of all, this is not possible to be done immediately, but we have to have a vision and we have to know where we go. And if we have a direction, then we can make the right things. Because from what I know, your cities are revising their master plans. The master plans are going to be in effect for a long time. Make sure you revise them in such a way that they follow sustainability and resilience concepts. The next thing is that make sure you implement what's being planned. This is the most important thing. Because very many times you plan something, and I don't mean the kingdom, I mean all over the world, you plan something and something else is happening. So keep in mind what you want to do, where you want to go, and start moving slowly in that direction. I never told you to build new roads. On the contrary, no matter how many roads you build, they're not going to be enough. I told you start using mixed-use development. Avoid single-family housing. Start thinking about density. Start thinking about services in the cities. And as you do these things, they cost more or less as much as they cost what you're doing right now. As you develop the new metro, if we go to Riyadh, for example, as you're doing the new metro is, and as it should be, linked to the urban planning of Riyadh. Cannot be separate, because in every station, things are going to happen there. So the city within cities happens de facto with the stations of the metro. In Riyadh, you had this wonderful plan by Doxiadis that has not been implemented. But now it has gone in a certain direction. So it's very difficult to go back and redo things. But definitely you have to think in terms of sustainability. So as you produce your new master plan for, name it, for a city, for Dammam, for example, ask, is it sustainable? And the next thing is about the private sector. The private sector is interested in the long term only when they feel that there is a guarantee that they're going to be sticking to the project, that the government is not going to nationalize what they do. And at the same time, the government is interested in those projects as long as there are regulators. So the private sector is not doing whatever they want to do, especially in monopolistic situations. I can give you examples from, for example, a classic example is the Thames Water in London. Thames Water in London is a private utility that provides water under very strict regulation, but the law says that cannot be nationalized unless it is given 25-year notice. And given that this is the UK, they feel quite comfortable and attracts funds, and actually attracts funds from your region as well. There are Arab funds that they have invested, and they're quite happy. I don't suggest that this is easy to happen. I don't suggest the culture is available, but I believe that the funding from the private sector that has a lot of money is necessary for some investments. I know this may not sound very popular, requires a lot of thinking on how it's going to be done, but it is a way to find money.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just not to take the time. I will just read some questions from the audience. I will start with general questions. He said, how can we prepare our local entities and cities in the future to deal with such unexpected emergencies? I think he assuming if our cities as is. I think you hear me.
Yes.
You got the question.
Yes,
Okay.
Actually, the next emergency may not be the same emergency like we have now. So it's very difficult to predict. So if an emergency like this one happens again, probably we know how to face it. But the fight was not only at the city level, it was at the public health level, it was at the level of medical research. So it's extremely difficult to predict what's going to be the next one. However, we know already that and as we're getting ready for those, we have to prepare our cities as well. So the only thing I say at this point is take the opportunity to plan your cities and go back and look again and ask. For example, let me give you a very classic example here, which goes mostly to, well, probably Saudi Arabia as well. Let's take the capacity of a road. Let's take on the road, there are buses, cars with one or two people in the car, some motorcycles, pedestrians, and parked cars. And then we calculate what is the density of the road per person. In other words, how many people can take for every, let's say, 100 square meters of a road. And then replace that with more pedestrians, more buses, no parked cars, and let's take very few private cars. And then you can see that you can go up to 4 times more the capacity of the road. So the answer is not to have more roads. The answer is to rethink how we move within the city. And I can send you some wonderful papers that have been written exactly about that, about the capacity of the road in terms of people moving on a road within the city.
Now, just let me take some specific question.
Yes.
Okay, you highlighted. Okay, let me read it. You highlighted the importance of the use of information technology and digital tools in local government. How do you think such a digital transformation will impact on the citizen engagement in local governance? How can local government turn this into an advantage?
Well, it's going to turn into an advantage from the point of view that it's going to make the life of citizens much easier. When you want to interact with the government, you don't need to go physically there the same way you do not go to the bank anymore. You should be allowed to do things electronically. Not every person will be able to do that. It's going to be an age discrimination in doing that. We know it. But let's say if you want to renew your driver license, if you want to get a particular certificate, if you want to get a building permit, all these things, I assure you, can be done electronically. And if they're done electronically, there is a timestamp. And I would say that at the end of the day, the government may have very few offices, and everybody's going to be more efficient as a result of that. By the way, these are ideas that they are not very theoretical from the point of view that they have happened in several parts of Europe, that the push for using information technology has really skyrocketed. At the same time, it has allowed information technology and online teaching to flourish. And I don't mean that this is a substitute for students going to the classroom, but it can be a very good addition. Students, especially students of the high school or even the university, they can follow lectures, they can do many things online in addition to going to the university or to their classroom for the reasons we all know that they must go.
Okay. Another question, you showed how the sustainable city concept is a key element of creating circular economy. What do you think the role of the smart city agenda in achieving sustainable cities and in turn achieving circular economy at the national level?
Well, the small cities have a big, they're in danger, because they're in danger as people want to go to the big cities that they have more opportunities. So we should always worry and think how we can keep people in the smaller cities. In the old days, they were staying in the smaller cities to be close to their farms. This is not the reason anymore. Nevertheless, by using information technology more, the smaller cities can really flourish, and the smaller cities can be even more productive in terms of the circular economy as long as they put it in their agenda. The challenge is the circular economy for the bigger cities. I invite you, and I can send you the link. There is an event at the UN on the 21st of April that 3 mayors, including the mayor of Athens and the mayor of Lisbon in Portugal, They're going to talk about the efforts of their cities for circular economy. I'm pretty sure that it can be applied, and this is something that needs further research. I don't believe I have all the answers, but definitely some of your questions require studying and looking at the local needs and talking to the people there and try to understand how they can be implemented. Actually, just before the pandemic, I attended a very interesting event in Riyadh called Green Riyadh. And there we discussed a lot about those ideas. We developed some proceedings. Each one of the participants, we sent a document in. And I believe that if you can search about the Green Riyadh event, it was just 1 or 2 months before the pandemic started. It had some of these ideas there because we were discussing them as part of the long-term plan of Riyadh.
Okay. Another question, you mentioned the importance of local governance in the post-pandemic world. What do you think the role of think tank organization like Center for Local Governance in this era? What could be the most important priority for them in supporting this transformation process?
This is probably the question that has a very clear answer. It is to identify centers of excellence and link all the different cities and transfer the knowledge from one to the other. And there are some times that the local governments need help, but they have the vision and the spirit to go in that direction and they need help. So the Center for Local Governance can put experts to help and at the same time can link the different cities. So all of them are doing better than each one of them separately. We observe that usually at the local governance level, some cities are more future-oriented. They're more centers of excellence than others. And this depends very much, I would say, by chance that someone there is looking for something bigger and better. So our center, I say our center because I'm a member of the Center for Local Governance at the Prince Sultan University, they can be extremely helpful.
Okay, thank you. I have a question in Arabic. I will read it in English. He said, when you talk about sustainability and the quality of life, usually we talk about large and big cities. He said, what about the medium-sized and small cities?
The same things apply to all cities. Absolutely.
But I think,
yes.
Here's a question. In reality, okay, they don't give the attention as when you talk about the large cities, the big cities. Okay.
No, I don't see any difference. Quality of life is quality of life.
Okay.
And people, and actually, quality of life is very important for your country. One of the conferences that was organized by the Center for Local Governments, it was about the humanization of cities. I found that conference to be interesting, productive, and we did not differentiate between smaller or bigger cities. Humanization of cities is humanization of cities. People need to be happy where they live.
I think we can take one question. I will just ask the organizer. We'll take one question. Okay, the last question, how can we in the kingdom prepare our local entities and cities for the future? This is the last question and we can conclude.
Yes, I think we need to give them the tools. We need to convince them, don't do things the way you were doing them all the time. Forget that. We need to give them the tools. We need to ask them what are the problems they face and give them answers. And of course, we know the problems. I'm pretty sure that our center knows the problems. So what we need to do is we need to give them the tools in a way that they're comprehensible. You notice that today I had prepared the lecture that probably would be a week-long lecture. The reason I did that was so you have it and people can look at that, and they can go over more of my slides. And I'm pretty sure that as they do that, they're going to find out that there are some things they can relate. And if they find things they relate, I invite them to ask the center to provide more answers. And I have also 3 examples of how we applied all these ideas in 3 different cases. And my center at Harvard has hundreds of cases that they could fit in whatever questions people may have. So please contact us, ask, and I will try to be as helpful as much as possible as part of the center.
Thank you very much. With this, we conclude. We come to the end. I would like to thank you very much, and also thank the audience. And hope next time we'll have you with us here with after the pandemic, because I think we still need more presentation, more discussion about the subject, but we would like to have it personally, not virtual actually. شكرا لكم جميعا يا اخوان. اكرر شكري للمركز، اكرر شكري الحقيقه لمجلس اداره المركز ولمن قام الحقيقه خلف فكره هذا المركز، واتمنى ان شاء الله الاستمرار نجاح والتوفيق وتقديم محاضرات في نفس المجال ومستمره في هذا الموضوع. الان اترككم الحقيقه مع الدكتور امير العلوان ليختتم هذا اللقاء. شكرا لكم جميعا والسلام عليكم ورحمه الله وبركاته.
في الختام ايها الاخوه والاخوات، يسرنا باسم مركز الاداره المحليه بجامعه الامير سلطان نتقدم لكم بالشكر والتقدير على مشاركتكم وتفاعلكم مع هذه المحاضره القيمه، كما لا يفوتنا أن نشكر سعادة الدكتور محمد الكثيري على حسن إدارته لهذه الجلسة. وأخيرا نتوجه بالشكر والتقدير لبروفيسور سبيرو بولالس على هذا العرض الشيق والمعلومات القيمة التي تناولتها هذه المحاضرة. Dr. Sabiru, we thank you very much for this nice presentation and deep thoughts about our localities and urban centers. I think we are facing a big challenge for our future cities and localities, and this pandemic, unfortunately, it seems like it's going to be with us for some time. And I think you should good lights on what can be the future for our localities and how can we prepare ourselves for such thing. Thank you very much. It's good ideas and deep thoughts, and hopefully that we all benefit from this presentation. Thank you.